Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for staying with us. Continuing on in the topic for tonight, which is the prophets of Allah, we're going to go on to the story of Yunus alayhi salam. So after a while, after Elisha and Elijah, came the prophet Yunus. Now he is called Jonah in the Bible. He was sent to the people of a land called Nineveh, and Allah had sent him to teach Islamic monotheism to the pagan people. Yunus alayhi salam was mocked by the people, and they ridiculed him and gave him a really hard time. So Yunus alayhi salam ran away. Allah called out to Jonah alayhi salam and demanded that he return to Nineveh and be strong, but instead he fled on a ship. So Allah commanded the wind and rain to batter the ship, make it turn around, but the crew refused. So Allah sent a great whale to beat the ship. So instead of taking the hint and turning the ship around, the crew drew lots, and Jonah's name was chosen. They actually drew lots 3 times, and Jonah's name came up all 3 times. He was chosen to be thrown overboard to lighten the ship and help it move out of the danger. Yunus alayhi salam did not understand why this was happening. But after he had left Nineveh, Allah caused the sky to darken and fill with fire, so the people of Nineveh would be reminded of all the people who had defied the worship of Allah in the past, and they were then destroyed. The people of Nineveh then repented and begged Allah to forgive them and bring Yunus alayhi salam back to teach them the right way. So Yunus alayhi salam was being completely out of line for his fear and anger and frustration, and he was actually rejecting Allah's call to return him to the task of being a prophet. After Jonah alayhi salam was thrown overboard, the great whale swallowed him whole under the command of Allah. Jonah was there in the layers of darkness, the night above, then the sea, and the whale itself. The darkness consumed him, and finally his tongue was loosened after confessing La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah. And then he begged forgiveness from Allah for his disobedience. Jonah began praising Allah from inside the belly of the whale, and all manner of sea creatures heard the praise of Allah coming from inside the whale, and they joined in. Allah then forgave Jonah because of his sincere worship and commanded the great whale to take Jonah and spit him out. The whale ejected Yunus alayhi salam on a remote island where he lay in great pain because of the stomach acids and the hot sun. So Allah caused the plant life to grow rapidly around him and bring shade and relief from the sun. After a little more than a month, Jonah alayhi salam was allowed to make his way back to Nineveh and was surprised by the warm welcome that he received. The people had been worshiping Allah and waiting for Yunus's return. So he led the people, more than 100,000 people embraced the straight way of Allah. Allah then showered the people with blessings and prosperity because of their sincere worship. Now, for the last few weeks, we've been talking about the prophets of Allah that are referred to in the Qur'an and Hadith. I left one out intentionally, and that is the prophet Dhul Kifl. I left him out because there is a debate regarding which biblical prophet he was, if any. So after we're finished with the remaining installments of the prophets, that's after this week, not next week, but the week after next, because remember next week is the Easter holiday, and we don't participate in that as Muslims, but the station here does. So we're not going to be on there next week, but the week after next we will bring you the pure instruction of who Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, was in Islam. And then the week after that we will talk about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and give you his entire life story. After that, we'll go back to Dhul Kifl and then talk about a few prophets in the Bible that may have been Dhul Kifl. That's people like Ezekiel and Isaiah. And then we're also going to talk about some other prophets in the Bible and others that are not in the Bible, but may have been prophets of Allah because of their teaching, and even some scholars of Islam have said these people may have been prophets. After all, 125,000 prophets have been known to exist according to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we were only given the names of 25 in the Qur'an. So that's going to be people like Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, all those stories that you probably heard in Sunday school if you're a convert to Islam or if you're a Christian listening. And then, of course, if you're Muslim, you may be getting some brand new information. So I hope that everybody will learn from this and gain. Now, for the rest of tonight's show, which is about 10 minutes, we're going to talk about the prophets Zechariah and Yahyah alayhi salam. The prophet Zechariah alayhi salam was a priest who stayed away from the innovations of the Sadducees and Pharisees who had perverted the word of Allah and established their own laws. They made haram what is halal and placed many burdens on those who wished to worship Allah correctly. Zechariah alayhi salam was a pious man who served the people and was charitable throughout his life. His position in the temple allowed him to teach people the right way. His only regret was that he was unable to father a son to carry his name and teachings with his beloved wife Elizabeth. After all these years, finally, Allah spoke to Zechariah in the holy place of the temple. Again, this is the place where all the major points of our spiritual history happened. This is where the prophet Yaqub alayhi salam saw the ladder to heaven, where Solomon alayhi salam built the temple, where Muhammad would later rise in Al-Miraj, and now where the Dome of the Rock stands today. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to Zechariah alayhi salam and told him of the coming of his son, who would be a strong prophet and prepare people for the one who would be the Messiah. Zechariah alayhi salam exclaimed, "How can I have a son? We're old and my bones are weak. Give me a sign so that I may believe." Allah gave him the sign that he would be unable to speak, yet there would be no illness or physical defect to see. Allah also commanded that the child's name be Yahyah, or John, and this was, again, a sign of his prophethood, that this name had never been given to anyone before. After a time, Yahyah was born, and Zechariah indicated on a slate, because he couldn't talk, that his name was to be Yahyah, or John. The people refused. His family refused because nobody had ever heard this name before. They said, "Oh, you're crazy. We're going to name him after you. We're going to name him after your father, your grandfather." All this stuff. But he kept insisting and writing on the slate, "Ooh, name him John." Finally, the people took his word. They heeded Zechariah's writing, and they named him Yahyah. Then Allah unsealed Zechariah's mouth, and he could speak. His first words were in praise of Allah. In Catholic tradition, there is something called the Benedictus that is supposedly the statement of Zechariah in praise of Allah after Yahyah alayhi salam was born. However, this is very doubtful that the words are actually those of Zechariah, because these words were not recorded for many, many years after Zechariah's death, and they were not considered canon by any Christian group for the first few centuries. It was not actually used in Catholicism until Benedict of Nursia began using it in the 5th century. Don't believe everything you read. Elizabeth and Zechariah were relatives of Maryam, radiyallahu, and therefore Yahyah alayhi salam was the cousin of Isa alayhi salam, and he was born about 8 months ahead of him. Yahyah alayhi salam was a serious and pious child who fed animals out of his own food until there was nothing left, and then he fed himself from leaves and fruits that he could find. Yahyah alayhi salam is called John the Baptist in the Bible, and it is confirmed in Islam that he taught people along the Jordan River, and that his task was to prepare for the teaching of Isa alayhi salam and bring them back to the straight way of Allah. What is referred to as baptizing in the Bible is actually known as